final speaker of the day and of the event is probably the one I am looking forward to the most. He is a partner at Pentagram, whose clients have included the New York Times, Saks Fifth Avenue, MasterCard, Princeton University, MIT Media Lab, Brooklyn Academy of Music, Wildlife Conservation Society, and Verizon. In fact, he and I have crossed professional paths twice in recent years. I've actually made a career out of implementing his design visions. He designed the ubiquitous H logo for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, and in 2019, Pentagram redesigned the Slack brand. He is President Emeritus of AIGA National, a former lecturer at Yale University, co-founder of the website Design Observer, and a prolific author. In fact, he has a list of accomplishments a mile long. Seriously, just go look up his Wikipedia page. With a career that spans 40 years, he hopes that this will be a chance for all of us to learn from his mistakes. Here to tell us about the worst advice he's ever gave, it is my pleasure to present to you Michael Bierut.
I'd like to tell you about the worst advice I ever gave. It came in the form of a 463-word essay that I wrote back in 2005 called Stay Up Late. My name's Michael Bierut. I'm a graphic designer. All I ever wanted to be was a graphic designer. When I was in kindergarten, I learned that I had a special talent, sort of a magic talent. I loved drawing, and it turned out I was good at it. I was shy, I was chubby, I was nerdy. Didn't have a lot of friends, but I had this one special thing I could do. I could draw. And it wasn't just a talent that I could use to show off to other people. It was something that I could use to soothe myself. I would spend hours and hours and hours alone in my room, both as a kid and then later as a teenager, just working on complicated, beautiful works of art. And then eventually I get the thrill of showing this work to others. If I could figure out a way to do this for the rest of my life, I would. And then miraculously, it turned out that I found that I could do that. I found a book by S. Neil Fujita called Aim for a Job in Graphic Design / Art. And it was about how to get a job doing art for a living. And there was something really, really, really important about this book that had to do with the idea that it was called Aim for a Job. I loved the idea of a job, of working with art, working as what I now learned was called graphic design to make a living. It was so exciting to me. I applied to college and I found a good program in a state school in my home state of Ohio, the University of Cincinnati. And I really applied myself there. I stayed up late night after night, pulled lots of all-nighters that I'm sure all of you have as well. And the whole time what I wanted to do is figure out how I could make a success of myself in this profession. Along the way, I encountered a magazine called Esquire magazine that had a special issue called How to Get a Job, actually. Literally, How to Get a Job. July 1977. And in this issue, it has a couple of pages where it says, these are the secrets of your first job. And it sort of unlocked the whole thing for me. I tracked this thing down on eBay just a month or so ago, and I was amazed at how I had memorized some of these rules, that I could almost recite them without having the magazine in front of me. Number one, this is what Esquire told me back in 1977. Your objective in a job is not self-expression, but to put bread on the table. Knowing this now will save you painful disillusionment later. Number five, there's only one perfect definition of doing a good job: making your boss look good. Number seven, don't expect thanks for a job well done. This is taken care of by the person who brings around your paycheck. Number eight, You will be well liked by everyone at work only if you are an attractive and quiet person on the very lowest rung of your organization. For some reason, I sort of like took all this as gospel. It was in a magazine, it must be true. And as I went out into the job market, this is what I was sort of girding myself with. And notice how harsh and severe these rules are. You know, it's not about self-expression, it's about doing the work, doing the work, doing the work. And I did get one last piece of advice. It was, I forget where I read it, but it was so simple it could have been anywhere, so fundamental it barely needed to be written down. It was simple. It was, whenever possible, outwork every other person in the room. Work harder, work longer, work more. So before there was anything called hustle culture, I was making an obsessive culture out of hustling. So what happened next sort of seemed almost inevitable to me and almost dreamlike. I had been dating my high school sweetheart, Dorothy. The two of us got married. We moved to New York. I got a low-paying job for a design hero of mine named Massimo Vignelli. He was the designer of the Bloomingdale's logo and the New York City subway map. His work was all over town and I was working for him. I ended up working there for 10 years. Then I became a partner at Pentagram, which is a job I have now. I've worked here for 30 years. Along the way, I've written 3 books. I've edited 9 other books. I founded a website. I started 2 podcasts. I taught at the Yale School of Art and the Yale School of Management. I won the gold medal of the AIGA and the Design Mind Award from the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. I was inducted into the New York Art Directors Club Hall of Fame. I did all of these things, and I don't want to forget, along the way, I stayed married to my high school sweetheart, and I had 3 wonderful children. And also, somewhere along the way, I heard about something called the 10,000-hour rule. You may have heard of this rule yourself. It was described by the writer Malcolm Gladwell in his book, Outliers. In this book, he quotes a physicist, a neuroscientist, who talks about the science of learning and the science of achieving skills. And this scientist, Daniel Levitin, says the following, and I'll read this to you. The emerging picture from studies that have been done is that 10,000 hours of practice is required to achieve the level of mastery associated with being a world-class expert in anything. In study after study of composers, of basketball players, of fiction writers, of ice skaters, of concert pianists, chess players, master criminals, what have you. This number, 10,000 hours, comes up again and again and again. Of course, this doesn't explain why some people get more out of their practice sessions than others do, but no one has yet found a case in which true world-class expertise was accomplished in less time. It seems that it takes the brain this long to assimilate all it needs to know to achieve true mastery. So you can see I achieved a lot of success, and I achieved success by what I thought was working hard. And after I'd achieved this success, I was asked by AIGA, my professional organization, to write down some advice that I would give new graduates entering the field. And so this is what I wrote. It was an essay that I called Stay Up Late. Here it goes. I'm going to read it to you word for word. 1 week after I graduated from college in Ohio, I moved to New York with my new wife, Dorothy, and began working as a design assistant at Vignelli Associates. It was 1980, and I was the lowest employee on the totem pole. Working in a design office in those days was different. I never touched a computer. As I recall, the office didn't even have a computer. In fact, we didn't have a fax machine. So I spent most of my days putting thinner and rubber cement and taping tissue paper over mechanical artwork boards. Every once in a while, I get to do a mechanical myself, usually following the direction of one of the more experienced designers. I was working in New York City for a designer that I idolized. I was the happiest person on earth. It so happened that we got an apartment that was 3 blocks in Manhattan, 3 blocks, literally 135-second walk away from where I worked at Vignelli Associates. Work started at 9:30 a.m. I usually got up at 9, still had time to pick up a donut on my way into work. Dorothy, on the other hand, had a corporate job downtown. She worked in the old World Trade Center, to be precise. She had to wake up before 6 every morning just to get to work by 8. So I literally slept 3 hours later every day, every morning. Every night, before, Dorothy would go to bed around 10 p.m. I was still wide awake, and our apartment was so small it drove me crazy. I had a key to the office, so I got in the habit of tucking my wife to bed every night and going back to work after she went to sleep, and to put in another shift, which would often last from about 10 o'clock to 3 in the morning. This went on for 4 years. Anything I've achieved in my career, I credit today to those 4 years. I loved working late at night. I worked on office stuff, I worked on personal projects. I played music really loud, I drank Mountain Dew. I would design anything. I designed invitations for my friends' parties, packaging for mixtapes, one-of-a-kind birthday cards, freebies for nonprofits. When my boss, Massimo Vignelli, noticed I had extra time during the day, he started giving me extra work. Things that would have taken 2 days only took 1 thanks to this night shift I was pulling. The more work I did, the faster I got, the better I got. It never occurred to me to ask for overtime. 25 years later, nearing 50 with 3 kids and the same wife, I can't tell you the last time I was awake at 3 in the morning, intentionally at least. So my advice to anyone starting a career as a designer, stay up late while you can. It pays off. So that was my essay, that was my advice. So what you'll realize is that this was my own version of that 10,000 hour rule. Many people read this piece. For years, people would come up to me and introduce themselves and tell me that reading this piece had changed their life. I was flattered and excited to hear that I had this kind of influence and that I'd given advice that really had made a difference. The last year and a half has changed everything, as we all know. It's a cliche. Everyone's life's been turned upside down by the pandemic and all of the things that have ensued as a result. Some people have suffered terribly. Compared to many, I didn't have it that bad. But one cold Saturday morning last February, something happened to me. I was taking out the trash. It was night. It was dark. I wasn't really looking where I was going. I put my foot down on a patch of ice. My feet went out from under me. I flew up in the air and came down like a ton of bricks on some very, very cold, hard stone. It hurt so bad I could hardly breathe. It hurt so bad I could hardly talk. I pulled myself inside with my wife Dorothy staring at me aghast. And I just made these inhuman noises for a while, gasping and groaning and clutching at myself. Now, I've fallen off a few bikes and I've fractured a rib now and then. I know there's not much you can do about that, and it really hurts, and boy, did this hurt. This was a Saturday night. I took some Tylenol, tried to go to bed, hard to sleep with a fractured rib, woke up, took some more Tylenol, sort of felt like maybe it was better, maybe it was worse, I couldn't tell, went to bed. Monday morning, I got up, and I trudged downstairs, turned on my computer, got dressed, time for a 9 a.m. Zoom call. So, as long as I kept eating Tylenol, and not really moving, I was sort of okay. But it still really hurt and I didn't seem to be getting better. So Monday came and went, Tuesday came and went. Finally on Wednesday morning, Dorothy came down and confronted me. She said, look, you're really in bad shape. You need to go to the hospital. Go to urgent care, go get this looked at. And I said, there's nothing you can do, it's a fractured rib. I know there's nothing you can do. I've got this Tylenol, this will do it for me. She said, I insist. So we had sort of a fight. She wouldn't let up. I literally said the words to my wife of 40 years, you're not the boss of me, I'll decide what to do. I was like a child. It's embarrassing when I think about it now. Finally, I gave in and said, okay, I'll cancel the work I have to do this afternoon, I'll go to urgent care. I went to this local kind of like urgent care drop-in center. A doctor looked at me and said, you should really get an x-ray. The x-ray place is open tomorrow morning, go in first thing. So I did. I went in the next morning and got these x-rays. Dorothy drove me, actually, God bless her. When I got the x-rays taken, the x-ray technician was like making this face. And I remember like looking at her and thinking, they should tell you in x-ray school not to make that face when you take the x-rays. It sort of is disconcerting for the patient because she sort of looked kind of alarmed and kind of like concerned, and I remember thinking if that's your resting x-ray face, it's like not a good look. But I sort of didn't think much about it either way, and I limped out. She said, does it hurt? And I said, yeah, it hurts. I think I fractured my ribs, right? So I left and went out, and I was kind of crawling inch by inch back into the car with Dorothy, and my phone went off. The phone rang, I picked it up, and it was a voice, and they said, this is urgent care. Are you the patient that was just in here getting x-rays? And I said, yeah. They said, could you come back in, please? And I said, okay. I went back in, and they said, sit down here. And then a doctor came out and solemnly told me that I had 4 fractured ribs and some damage to one of the bones that kind of are along my spine. Not really concerning. What was really concerning was that one of the ribs had fractured and had punctured my right lung. And in fact, my right lung had been collapsed since Saturday night, basically. So I was walking around with a collapsed right lung. This is actually called, I learned technically, pneumothorax, something you learn, right? I said, what do I do now? And they said, well, you have to go to the hospital like immediately. And I said, okay, Dorothy, listen. They said, don't get up. And I stayed in my seat, and Dorothy was standing there looking kind of terrified. I was scared. And they said, we've already called an ambulance. So they called an ambulance. The ambulance comes. I go in the ambulance takes me to the local hospital. I go right as a level 1 trauma patient into the emergency room. No waiting, no paperwork. I'm taken right in there. And they start doing these procedures involving putting stents in my side to inflate my lungs, all this complicated stuff. And they kept saying, how long have you had this? And I kept saying, since Saturday night, I guess. And they were like, wow, did it hurt? And I said, yeah, it hurt. They said, do you have trouble breathing? I said, yeah, it hurts. And so they were like kind of aghast that I'd been kind of doing Zoom calls and taking notes and doing work for 3 solid days with a collapsed lung. And what the problem with the collapsed lung is that it impedes your heart function. And if it kind of goes into your heart can stop beating. And as you don't have to be a doctor to know that's actually how you die, right? So my lung got reinflated, I got stabilized, I stayed in the hospital for about 3 or 4 days. And laying in that hospital bed, I was grateful that I had listened to Dorothy, and I told her that. I said, you made me come to the hospital, you saved my life, really. And I started to think about that 10,000 hour rule, the rule that says it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. I'd spent that time, probably more, training to do one thing, to be a graphic designer. And I'm a good graphic designer. I'm good at doing it. I love doing it. But what would have happened if I would have spent 10,000 hours practicing to be a better husband? What would have happened if I would have spent 10,000 hours practicing to be a better father or a better friend? It's wonderful to love your work. I still do. But your life and the people in your life, they need love too. In less than a week, I turned 64 years old. I'm not sure I've got 10,000 hours more to spare, but I hope you do. So use them wisely, and if you can, get some sleep. Thank you.
Wow. That was amazing, Michael. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome, Mina. Thank you.
How have you been?
I
mean, aside from that.
Very good. Great. Thank you. Comparable. Thank you. Very good.
Oh, wow. That was an incredible story. I can't even imagine how much pain you had to be in towards the end of that. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it really did hurt, but I don't know. It was really a surreal episode for me. But like I said, I learned a thing or two, so maybe that made it all worth it. So.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned before, like we all have kind of learned a few very important lessons during this last couple of years. That
yeah.
I think Sam in the chat mentioned it, but yeah, work it's not worth it sometimes. Like it's okay to like hustle. I've always had a problem with like hustle culture and like that kind of mentality, but yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. It was I've had the privilege of being able to show up a little bit on and off, but for the other days of the conference, and I'm glad that this was recorded in advance, because had I seen Lauren LaPreet's talk, she says, she basically said everything I said without the clarity of the near-death experience. So I'm like amazed and in awe that someone who seems so young to me had insights decades before it got through my thick head, at death's door. So this whole thing about sort of, rebalancing your life and understanding what's important it took me a long time to figure out, and I sort of figured out just in time. I hope I kind of get a few years under my belt and continue learning this. But I think that there's been themes that have recurred throughout, I think, the conference that really reflect this precisely. So.
Yeah, I mean, the conference has really been a treat in that sense that it has had unintentionally or not, this kind of this thread throughout it all is that, at the end, people are what matters, and you are a part of it. That includes yourself, like what your needs are and your priorities, they matter more than the work that you do and the amount of productivity and like output you have, like that. Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of us, like, if we didn't already know it now, I think that has the pandemic has put that in like pretty sharp clarity.
Yeah.
Kind of tell a little personal note. Like, I figured I relearned that lesson the past couple of years, not because anything physically happened to me, but I had kind of a mental sort of break for a while where I've always had this. I've battled with depression before, but being isolated, like very socially isolated during the past couple of years, like it exacerbated that tenfold, and I had a pretty truly awful crash, and that helped me sort of reprioritize some things. It provided a decent amount of clarity for me as well to kind of say what is really important to me. What do I really want to spend my time doing? And luckily now I have I keep saying clarity, geez, I have the clarity of mind to refocus my attention elsewhere now.
No, it's I mean, I've been doing this now for a long time, and I have the privilege now of being a manager, and I have a team of a dozen or so designers here at Pentagram, and it occurred to me, there's something about, when I began my career and first started managing people, I remember how much I would fall back on the idea that, I stayed up all night back when I was, in my early 20s. So it's perfectly fair that I expect everyone else to stay up all night now that they're in their early 20s and I'm in my late 20s or early 30s. And it's sort of like, it's in a way, it's a version of just kind of, this is over dramatizing it, but like sort of if you've had an experience of abuse, you internalize and kind of pass it on. And so I think it's Mina, I think you're exactly right. It's very tied up with your emotional state, obviously. And when I was actually preparing this talk, and I'm so glad that Gina and the team and you and everyone else invited me to do it, because I've never talked about this like publicly before. But I think if you are like that lonely kid soothing yourself by just kind of like doing something for hours in your room, then you find that there's some version of that you can do for money as an adult. It's like really and it sort of is a kind of addiction. And I think about John Voss's presentation, which was just so devastating and important, if you ask me. And you realize that there's like addiction happening at all sorts of different levels. As designers, we're kind of using the tools of addiction to build appeal in the products we're doing. But at the same time, we're sort of using, those same tropes kind of can apply to the way we push ourselves, the way we push the people around us. And I think it just creates these very, very kind of dangerous circles in a way. So.
Yeah. Okay, want to get into some of the questions that we had from the attendees. We have quite a few, so hopefully I can get through any possible. So Christy wants to know if you had followed this advice, if you had this kind of wherewithal from the beginning of your career, do you think you would have had as much success in it?
I don't know, and the honest answer is maybe not. I don't think the answer is necessarily probably not, because I know when I look back on it, I know there were times where I just was almost senselessly working, just kind of like I did it just because it was a compulsion in a way, and it wasn't about being smart and being wise. And also, I would also say another thing is that,
I think the more you are a whole human being, a whole integrated human being, the better you are at whatever it is you're choosing to do to achieve, whatever goal you're trying to achieve. I think you do it better as a full human being as opposed to as someone who is sort of relentlessly on a single task with kind of blinders on. And so I think in some ways I may have actually, when I look back, there are opportunities that I probably ignored, things that I could have been exposed to that I didn't take the time to notice or care about. That had I actually taken a breath and forced myself to be, not forced myself, but allowed myself to give permission to myself to kind of like just relax and be exposed to these different things. I think it may have kind of pushed me in some directions that that I thought were foreclosed to me. And I think that, and that's true no matter what it is you do. And then, I think it's also what we owe each other as people. What you owe your partner, your family, your loved ones, the people in your community. All that work is all things that we're inclined not to create room to consider and to devote time to, unless you sort of are willing to focus less on those 10,000 hours and more on just, being a person. It's a good question, though.
Sort of a follow-up to that question, it comes from Dan Mall, and he wants to know, how do you balance this ambition with not overworking yourself?
Well, it's funny because my wife Dorothy, who's obviously, as people commented in the chat, is clearly the hero of this story, and who I first and only girl I ever kissed. We started dating on February 20th, 1974. So it's been a long journey with Dorothy, and we're still together despite it all. And in spite of me, she's put up with a lot. And I think that she's noticed, it was a few years ago that I started kind of changing my attitude about this. It corresponded with stopping drinking, interestingly enough. And I sort of can't say it was a cause and effect, but I may have been using that to kind of suppress kind of my own, the unease that this sort of imbalance strikes. And as I came out of that and started really resetting my priorities, I would say to Dorothy, I just want to quit and never work again and just kind of do nothing but walk the dog, do the crossword puzzle, cut carrots and onions and help you prepare dinner and get some sleep. And she said to me, it's always black and white with you, isn't it? It's like you either have to work all day and all night, or you're never going to work again. Isn't there something in between? And I think there, obviously I've got more problems than we can solve in this Q&A session. But I think that's a challenge depending on what your personality is. I mean, you didn't comment on it, but someone has noticed that I took the pains to wear exactly the same outfit I was wearing when the thing was taped on me. And like I sort of would have been really if I wouldn't have done that, I sort of like would have been, oh shit, I wore, I'm not wearing the same outfit, and sort of, I mean, like what kind, what kind of person thinks that way? But that is me, unfortunately. So it sort of takes discipline, it's weird because it takes discipline to keep your balance in a way. It's hard to do, and you sort of think, oh, if you just relax, you'll kind of fall into that balance. But maybe the answer is that it's the work is just as hard to strike that balance as it is to just work, single-mindedly without thinking. So.
Yeah, I honestly had a similar thought about wearing the same outfit. Actually, I did wear the same outfit day one as I did in my intros, but I couldn't wear the same shirt 3 days in a row. So,
well, you look fantastic every day. Every day you look better.
Oh, well, thank you. I honestly, Gina and Isaac know this, but during the recording of the intros, I considered very strongly bringing outfit changes for each day. Like I almost went there. So I too have a similar need to overdo things sometimes. Yeah. Okay, let's see if I can get some more questions in here. Crap, I'm sorry. There's a lot of questions. I'm trying to find a really good one here. So let's go back to a little bit about your work for a second. So what do you think is the work that you are most proud of doing?
Well, actually, like, I mean, and I'm sure I share this with many, many people, who are in the audience, and many of the other speakers. If the privilege that we have in doing the work that we do is that it's public. Someone said, I think someone said, in a way, it was a social science, in a way, that you can look at and sort of think, it acquires meaning only when people are using the things that we do and when it's reaching the public. And so the first time I saw, I remember I designed a shopping bag for a department store, and I had my nose down, and I just was doing nothing but working on these bags for months on end. And then finally I was like walking around, and I saw a complete stranger holding my shopping bag. And I remember I sort of like almost ran up to this person, and to shake their hand and to introduce myself. And I realized, thank God, I am kind of socially inept, sort of, but I sort of realized that would have been terrifying for that person. So I just sort of kind of like followed quietly around for about a block or two. But I think there's instances where the work we do gets out in public that make me really proud. You and I both shared a client in the Hillary for America campaign. And I'm sure after you did the pantsuit design system and you would see it just out there in the wild, you sort of, you realize that the impact you have is just bigger. You both remember the moment where you sort of were doing that precise piece of work, and you may have been all alone. It may have been, 1 a.m, who knows? And then a month later, there it is happening, and you don't own it anymore, and it's out there in the world. I remember feeling that way about that symbol. And we're doing some work on the Obama Presidential Center right now, and have given advice on this big inscription that's going to appear on the side of the tower. And I've seen some renderings of it, and sort of thought, that's something that if I see it will make me really happy, that I'll really be proud that I had something to do with it. Although I'd say most people won't look at that and think, does it take skill to put letters on the side of a building? Like every building I see has some letters on it. Why is this a thing? And, so I think it's not even a matter of people giving you credit or admiring you because you've done these things, but just a sense that something you've done has had a slight effect in the world. And I think, again, this has come up over and over again the past few days, that effect can be positive or negative. And, what you try to do is just, try to amplify the positive ones and put yourself in a position where the work you do can have more positive effect than negative. So.
Yeah. So speaking of, Hillary for America campaign, yeah, that probably was the thing that is currently the thing I'm most proud of being involved with in my life. And yeah, you're right. Even though no one has ever actually seen Pantsuit, just the fact that even you what it is. And I remember getting contacted by you after the post went out, and I was just and that was a moment for me. I'm like, oh wow, this is a thing, and people have seen it and they know about it and they're interested in it. That made me very proud. So yeah, it's kind of, I like that approach to it. Pride and success can come from just seeing people interact with something you put your heart and soul into.
And by the way, if you want to make yourself happy and make someone else happy, if you see something that you like and admire and you have a way of contacting that person who did that, they really like it for the most part. One time I was talking to I met a writer, and I had read their work, and I kind of could quote actually one of their sentences to them. And then I asked them if they thought that was weird and stalkerish, and they say, no, you don't know what it's like to kind of sit around writing this stuff, having no idea whether anyone reads it, meeting a lot of people who sort of pretend they've read it and kind of smile and nod, and then go, the minute you leave, they say, who was that guy again? And sort of to actually, again, it's sort of a way of, the work we do is only part of who we are, I think, and you and I and the other people, we all have many lives who that are not just necessarily that thing that I did that you saw or vice versa, but still just to acknowledge. I mean, I'll see things that I like, and I really will remind myself, oh, I should send that person a note. And sometimes it's someone I know, sometimes someone I've never met. Sometimes they don't, sometimes I don't even hear back from them. And I'm not doing it because I'm trying to network, quote unquote, or make a contact. I just think it's nice to sort of realize that something you did resonated with someone. And that thing you do, we're fortunate because we actually make stuff sometimes that people see, but other people are doing all sorts of things. There was that guy who put that pigtail catheter in my side to reinflate my lung. I got to meet him when he checked up on me when I was fully dressed, and we were both standing and I was breathing normally. And I really told him how grateful I was that he did that with such skill. And I could tell it was the kind of, that might have been the fourth time he did it that day for all I know, but I could tell that it was not just nice for him to hear that. And I actually bought some flowers and took it to the x-ray place. And I, the technician that I thought had bad resting x-ray face, who really made it possible for my life to be saved. I came by there and I said, you don't remember me, but I was here like a couple of weeks ago when you sent me to the hospital, and enjoy these flowers, thanks, bye. And I was sort of shy about it, but people like that. So it only takes a second, and it's nice to do. So I recommend it as a way to make yourself happy as well as others.
I really love that idea. Okay, so it looks like that we are out of time. I'm hearing the voice of God in my ear saying and wrap it up. So it is time for us to go. But I have had such a lovely time talking to you. It's always great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. I know that Gina and the rest of the team we're very excited to have you on board.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was an honor to be here, and I just loved watching the other presentations, and I'm flattered to be included in such a roster. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we will be right back with the wrap up with Henri and myself.
Thank you.